Part 1. A pale dawn light spread over the low domes of Arden Farm. The recycled air hummed through vents, and rain tubers cast quiet shadows on the red soil. Each morning, workers checked the hydroponic bays for leaks and pests. They touched green leaves as if they spoke to them. Luke picked up a pruning tool and walked down the narrow aisle, humming a soft tune, nearly lost in the hum of machines. As he rounded a corner, a faint rustle made him pause. He frowned. Machines did not rustle. He followed the sound, careful. Not to knock over any trays, a vent grate hung loose on one side. Luke knelt and peered through. At first, he saw nothing but dusty metal and empty space. Then, a thin arm reached out. Bright, wide eyes looked back. The girl crouched inside the vent shaft. Her skin was a pale lavender, and her hair was silver white. Her body was so small that she seemed like a lost child. Her ribs showed beneath tight skin. Luke's stomach tightened. He stepped back and scanned the hall. No one else was near. He crouched again. "Hey," he whispered, voice gentle.
"Hey there?"
The girl did not answer. She pulled her knees to her chest and trembled. Luke slipped off his tool belt and left it by the vent. He took a pouch of dried fruit from his pocket, set it on the floor, and tapped the metal grate. The fruit tumbled through the gap. The girl's eyes followed the pieces as they rolled out. Hunger lit her gaze. She crawled forward and picked a piece, eating it slowly. Luke watched quietly. He decided not to raise an alarm, reached into the vent and draped a thin blanket over her shoulders. It was his own. The blanket smelled of earth and sweat. The girl looked up, surprise and fear in her eyes. He smiled kindly. "I'm Luke," he said. "I'm a farm tech. I will help you." She tilted her head. Eyes wide, she tried words. They did not work. Luke realized she might not speak any common languages. He pointed to himself. "Luke." Then he pointed to her. Name of the girl. Pressed her lips and closed her eyes. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She shook her head. Luke sat back on his heels and gestured for her to eat more. He took out water and poured a little into a shallow dish. He moved it near the vent. The girl sipped the water. Each drop seemed to give her strength. Luke stayed with her until she finished. Then he stood and brushed dust from his jacket. "Come with me," he said softly. "You are safe." The girl hesitated. Then she climbed out of the vent. Her legs shook. Luke slipped one arm under her, steadying her. She leaned on him like a bird with a broken wing. He carried her down the corridor toward the service hatch. No one else moved. All workstations were empty. Luke knew he had to act fast. He opened the hatch. It led to a narrow tunnel where old pipes ran along the walls. The tunnel smelled of oil and rust. Luke moved quickly, keeping the girl close. He found a disused storage room with a bunk bed. It had been unused for years. The metal frame was worn, but the mattress looked clean. Luke laid the girl on the mattress and covered her with a spare blanket. He knelt beside her. "You are hungry," he said. "You are thirsty." He pointed to the dish of water and a small pack of fruit. She nodded once, then closed her eyes. Her breathing grew more even. Luke watched her chest rise and fall. He wondered where she came from. He thought of the patrol ships that passed overhead. Did she jump from one? Did she walk across miles of tundra? Outside the room, the hum of the colony seemed far. Luke slipped back into the corridor. He needed answers. He needed a plan. He returned with a datapad and tapped a few commands. Records for alien arrivals were strict. Refugees from border worlds had to face hours of questioning. Colonists feared the unknown. Many believed aliens would bring viruses or threats. A lone child would not be an exception. Luke frowned. This girl had no record. He could report her and face the rules. But he could not let her be locked away or worse. He remembered morning classes about mercy and hope. He recalled how his parents saved stray animals. He felt the same pull. He would protect her. He returned to the storage room and sat in a metal chair. He held the datapad on his knee. He tapped a quick note. Emergency shelter needed. Deleted it. He tapped again. Hidden guest. Deleted again. Finally, he set the datapad aside. Rules could break. Compassion could heal. He looked at the girl. Her lips twitched as if dreaming. She wore a simple tunic that started just below her thin collarbones. It hung loose and bore the logo of a lost expedition. Her left eye had a faint scar traced. It with his mind? Did it mark a battle or a farm accident on her world? He cleared his throat. He whispered, "I will find your home." Then he rested his head against the metal wall. The dim light cast soft shadows on the floor. The girl slept, on, her breathing calm. Luke wondered if she would trust him more when she woke. He hoped so. Outside, the colony busied itself. Machines hummed and lights blinked. Headers above the hydroponic bays changed numbers to track yield. The daily quota was low on water. Shipments had been delayed by storms. Colonists feared failure. Yet amid all this, a small, alien girl lay safe in a forgotten room. No one else knew, least for now. Luke sighed and closed his eyes. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. We did know one thing. He would not leave her side. Whatever happened, next, she would not face it alone. And for the first time since he started his shift, he felt hope bloom in his chest. Part 2, Rhea woke to a dim light filtering under the door. Her head ached and her stomach growled. Luke sat beside her, a small bowl of water and fruit on his lap. He offered her a piece of dried pear. She took it gratefully and chewed slowly. Her eyes were clearer now. She sat up and brushed silver hair from her face. She looked around the small room, fear still in her gaze. Luke smiled gently. He spoke in the basic trade tongue, slow and clear. "You are safe here," he pointed. At himself. Then he pointed at her. "Rhea." She stared at his finger and nodded. She said Rhea in a soft voice. Luke's heart warmed. He added Rhea. He tapped his chest and then hers. Repeated the word until she smiled. Rhea looked at the vent grate on the floor. She pressed her fingers to it and frowned. Luke nodded and knelt to fix it. Replaced the grill and secured bolts so the room would stay hidden. Rhea watched each movement. She seemed curious, but cautious. When he finished, he stood and patted the wall. He whispered, "Home." She tilted her head, not understanding. Luke removed the datapad. He flipped it to drawing mode and sketched a simple house. Walls, roof, door. He tapped the door. Home. Then he drew small stick figures. One human, one small alien girl. He tapped the figures and said, "You." Home. Rhea studied the drawing. She opened her mouth to speak. She pointed at the figure of the girl and then at the door on the house. Luke nodded excitedly. He grabbed a scrap of paper and drew a circle around the girl figure. Then he drew arrows, pointing toward a bigger circle around the house. He repeated home. Rhea's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. She tapped the girl figure and drew 2 small X marks by the head and arms. Then she drew an explosion. Symbol. She pointed to the trees outside the house she drew. She gestured wide to show a crash. Luke's stomach clenched. He understood. Her home was gone. Luke closed the datapad and held out his hand. He tried another question. Where from? He drew a curved line on paper ending in a star. He tapped the star. World. Rhea studied the star mark. She shook her head and whispered words in her own tongue. Luke frowned. He did not know her language, tapped his ear and said, "Speak." She pressed lips and sighed. Frustration crossed her face. Luke took a deep breath. He knew he needed help. He left Rhea safe on the bunk and walked to the main corridor. He returned with a thin woman in her late 20s, Jaya, the colony's medical aide. Jaya glanced around and saw no guard. Luke whispered, "I need help." Jaya nodded and glanced at the room. Luke pointed to Rhea's pale skin and thin frame. Jaya's eyes softened. Jaya knelt and checked Rhea's pulse. She murmured words of concern. She lifted the tunic to check her ribs and gently pressed. Rhea winced and drew back. Jaya spoke softly. "She is starved. We must feed slowly." She tapped a small kit and said, "Vitamins." She injected a drop under Rhea's tongue. Rhea blinked and relaxed. Jaya smiled kindly. Luke watched. He felt relief. Jaya rose and turned to him. Driss spoke quietly. We cannot report yet. She needs rest. I will bring more supplies. Luke nodded. Jaya slipped away. Luke returned to the bunk and sat beside Rhea. He handed her a small dish of soft vegetables. She smelled them, then ate slowly. Each bite gave her color. Luke cheered silently. Days passed in secret. Luke brought fresh water, fruit, and vegetables. Jaya added healing salves and vitamins. Rhea's weight increased, and her skin glowed faintly. One morning she sat up and looked at Luke with bright eyes. She held her hands out and tried to speak. Luke repeated his name. She repeated after him. Luke. He smiled and wrote Luke on paper. She copied the letters carefully. Day. By day, she learned 5 human words. Water, food, safe, home, help. She pointed to water. Then Luke said, water. She repeated. She laughed when she said it right. Luke wrote each word in a small notebook. He used drawings to teach simple grammar. Words for you, me, go, here. Every lesson made her stronger and more confident. One afternoon, Luke brought a map of surrounding sectors. He spread it on the bunk and tapped landmarks. The tundra, the crash, site, the colony. Rhea's finger moved along the drawn lines. She pointed to a spot far north. She tried words. Luke listened. He thought she said ship. He tapped the map at that spot and sketched a small ship. She nodded vigorously. Luke understood. She wanted to find her ship. Tears welled in Rhea's eyes. She covered her face. Luke put an arm around her. He whispered, we find ship. He tapped the map and drew a path. She watched intently. Hope glimmered in her gaze. Luke felt the same hope. He closed the map and swept it aside. He knew the next step would be risky. That night, Luke looked at Rhea asleep. He held her hand and remembered his promise. I will. Find your home, he whispered to himself. The colony rules were clear. Any alien arrival must be reported. Hiding her could mean exile or worse, but he could not abandon her, not after all they shared. He shut his eyes and let the steady hum of the colony machines fill his mind. Tomorrow, he would ask the foreman for extra ration tags. Tomorrow, he would search crash records in the archives. Tomorrow, he would risk everything for Rhea. Shiwask, the starving alien girl, held his promise and his trust. Together, they would face the unknown. And for the first time in her life, Rhea felt the stir of hope in her heart. Part 3, a week after Rhea began to heal, the hydroponic bays showed strange spots. Luke arrived early and saw pale patches on lettuce leaves. The water pump hummed as usual, but the mist looked cloudy. Luke frowned and tested the water. It had odd particles. He called the foreman Mara, who frowned at the test strip. We may lose half the yield, she said. Colonists depended on these greens for nutrition. Luke thought of Rhea. He packed a small kit and hurried to the hidden room. Rhea slept when he arrived, but he gently shook her shoulder. Her eyes opened slowly. Problem, he said, pointing to the kit and sketching water and leaves on the datapad. She blinked awake and followed him into the corridor. They moved quickly through service tunnels to the hydroponic wing. The air smelled of damp algae. Mara met them at the entrance, arms crossed. She nodded at Luke. Show me.
I'll Luke letter.
Inside, he pointed to the cloudy mist. Mara tapped her cum badge, calling for a full inspection after their fix. Luke shook his head. He whispered to Rhea, we fix now. Rhea stepped forward. She tapped her temple, then the water pump, then the vent. She sketched a simple filter on paper. Layers of charcoal, sand, cloth. She pointed to the pump. She said in clear trade tongue. Luke translated, Rhea suggests a filter here. It clears the water. Mara looked at the sketches. She frowned, then shrugged. Try. Luke and Mara gathered materials, spare pipes, cloth scraps, charcoal from the waste incinerator, and sand from the storm shelter. Colonist workers watched curiously as they assembled the device. Rhea worked with quiet focus. Her small hands fit the pipes, and she layered the filter parts inside. Luke held pieces steady. Mara watched and offered help when asked. Together, they built a cylinder that could join to the mist line. When it was ready, Mara flipped a switch. Water flowed through the new filter. Cloudy mist turned clear. Droplets fell on leaves like fresh rain. The team waited in silence. After a minute, Luke tested the water again. The strip showed normal levels. Relief spread on their faces. Mara smiled at Rhea. "Good work," she said quietly. Rhea flushed. She looked down at the floor. Luke patted her shoulder. He whispered, "You saved the crop." The workers cheered softly. Hey. No one mentioned she was an alien. They said Luke led the fix. Rhea watched their faces. They no longer looked at her with fear. She felt hope. The next morning, the colony breakfast hall buzzed. Colonists talked of the saved harvest. Mara told officials that a tech error caused the spots, but that the fix worked. Luke received praise for quick action. Rhea ate breakfast. Alone in the hidden room, Luke brought her extra fruit. She smiled and said, "Thank you." He replied, "We are a team." Rin, a young worker, slipped into the room. She held a sprig of fresh lettuce. The leaves were bright and healthy. She offered it to Rhea. "For you," she said. Rhea accepted and smelled the greens. She remembered her hunger when she arrived. Her heart swelled. Later that day, Luke and Rhea sat by the bay windows. Golden light fell on their faces. Luke traced circles on the datapad, he asked. "Your world? Did it have gardens?" Rhea closed her eyes and whispered memories. She drew. Round stones, water channels, and tall flowers. They looked like glowing orbs on stems. Luke nodded as he sketched. Rhea tapped the drawing. She placed her hand on her chest, then on Luke's. She showed gratitude. Luke wrote home on the pad and underlined it. He tapped it twice. Rhea repeated the words softly. Luke smiled. That evening, Mara visited the storage room. She brought news. "The council will meet tomorrow about expanding the bays," she said. "We will test your filter on more crops." She looked at Rhea. "You can join us." Rhea's eyes shone. She stood tall beside Luke. Rhea lay awake that night. She listened to the hum of the colony. She thought of her lost home and her lost family. She felt fear creep in, but then she remembered the green leaves and the happy faces. She leaned back and closed her eyes. She whispered, "This can be home." Luke checked on her before sleep. He sat on the chair and watched her chest rise and fall. He thought of the long road ahead. It would face new dangers, and the patrol ship might arrive soon. But for now, they had a small victory. He touched her hand gently and whispered, "We move forward." Rhea squeezed his hand. The next morning dawned bright. Workers in yellow vests flowed into the bays. They followed Rhea's instructions too. Set up more filters. Luke guided them through the new steps. Colonists recorded data and logged yields. The air smelled of fresh green life. Sparks of hope ignited across the colony. Rhea stood by Luke and Mara as the first test batch of spinach sprouted anew. She smiled. A simple alien girl had saved a farm. She had changed many lives, and Luke had changed hers forever. Time and weeks, Rhea felt she belonged. She looked at the pale sky beyond the domes and thought, maybe this world could be her second home. Part 4. Rena, the colony foreman, stood at the entrance to the hydroponic wing and checked her datapad. She frowned at the incoming alert. The patrol ship Arcturus was due to arrive tomorrow for its quarterly inspection. They found any unapproved alien on the colony? The council could impose harsh penalties. Luke felt a knot in his chest. He knew Rhea's safety depended on secrecy and quick thinking. Rhea heard footsteps outside her hidden room. She sat up and smoothed her tunic. Luke entered with Mara, the medic, and Rin, the young worker who had brought her lettuce. They closed the door behind them. Mara whispered, "We need to plan." She tapped her cum badge. "Call only those we trust." Luke nodded. He pointed to Rhea and said, "We protect," Rhea repeated. "Protect." He sketched a small group circle on the datapad. He drew stick figures inside. Then he pointed to each person, Mara, Rin, and himself. He tapped 3 figures and Ria's figure. He tapped the pad and said team. The 4 looked at each other and nodded. Luke drew papers on the pad, tapped them and said ID. Ria watched. She understood they needed identity records. Mara said softly, I can forge medical records. I list her as a refugee from a storm-hit sector, Rin added. I can adjust the housing logs so she has a room in the dorms, Luke said. I handle official report, file emergency asylum. They all agreed. They spread out in Rin's quarters that evening. Stacks of datapads lay on a makeshift table. Mara tapped a sequence on her medical console. She typed details. Name Ria Tal, surname from her tongue, age 14, origin Sector 9. She injected a harmless tracer into a sample vial. Luke copied the entry into the colony registry and adjusted timestamps. Rin printed a dorm assignment slip and a ration card. She wrote Ria's name in neat letters. Ria watched, nervous but hopeful. She touched the papers with care. Mara folded the medical slip and handed it to her. Mara said, Carry this always. She smiled gently. Ria tucked the papers inside her tunic. She felt warmth in her chest. These papers gave her a chance. Luke looked at his datapad. He had drafted a cover story. He tapped the screen and read aloud, Ria Tal arrived on colony as emergency refugee after ice storm damaged transport ship. She received medical treatment and is now under provisional protection. He deleted a sentence about hiding her. He said, We do not mention vent. He tapped twice. Good. Rin paced. She said, We rehearse story. If patrol asks, we speak same words. Mara nodded and said, We next meet at the docking bay. Luke added, We must stay calm. Ria repeated, Calm. They agreed, and dispersed. The next morning, the colony buzzed with news of the patrol. Systems were checked. Workers in blue vests moved supplies. Luke led Ria and the small team through service tunnels to the docking bay. The bay was empty, but quiet hums came from the power core. Shadows stretched long under the high ceiling. Mara tapped her cum badge and whispered, Patrol arriving. She pointed to a distant hatch. Together, they moved closer. An airlock hissed. The patrol ship's landing struts sealed with a metallic clang. Luke clenched his fists. He glanced at Ria. She squeezed his hand and gripped her forged papers. Rin adjusted the strap of her tool bag. She carried extra cum batteries and a small data pad with the colony logo. Luke held a clipboard with the asylum draft. Mara carried her medical kit. Ria walked between Luke and Mara, head high. The main hatch opened. A patrol officer stepped out. She wore a clean white uniform with silver stripes. She scanned the bay. Data pad in hand? Luke stepped forward. He bowed slightly. Welcome to Arden Farm, he said in trade tongue. The officer nodded and said, Inspection team arriving soon. I need your records.
Out.
Luke handed the clipboard.
Out.
The officer checked. The printed application. She tapped on the digital seal. Emergency refugee status. Granted by council. She looked up. Medical clearance. Luke pointed to Mara. She stepped forward and showed the medical slip. The officer checked the tracer vial. She sniffed the air. No sign of infection. She smiled thinly and nodded. The rest of the patrol marched in, 6 officers in clean uniforms. They wore masks, but greeted the foreman Rena, who arrived then. Luca introduced Rena. She explained the recent harvest improvements and the new filter system. The officers listened politely. One officer asked about labor shortages, Rena said. The colony welcomed new refugees with skill. The lead officer glanced at Ria. Luke saw her eyes. She asked a quick look. He met the officer's gaze and said, That is Ria Tal. He pointed to Ria. The officer drew closer. She held out a scanner. Ria stepped forward. Mara whispered, Breathe. Ria nodded and held out her hand. The scanner light glowed green. The officer's frown eased. Records match. Her cum? She is cleared. Luke exhaled. He felt each breath fill his chest. A moment earlier, he feared exposure. Now, the forged papers held true. The patrol spread out, testing air quality, checking machines, reviewing logs. Mara answered their questions with measured calm. Rin guided them to the new filters and explained the assembly process. Rhea stayed close, silent but proud. At noon, the lead officer gathered the group. She said, "All systems clear. Arcturus thanks Arden Farm for cooperation." She saluted. Rena returned the salute. The officers turned and marched back to their ship. The hatch closed behind them. The bay grew silent again. Rhea let go of her papers and tucked them away. She looked at Luke. Her eyes shone. Luke smiled and said, "You did great." Rhea nodded but looked at Mara and Rin. She murmured, "Thank you." The three teammates exchanged smiles. Later, back in the hydroponic wing, workers resumed planting and harvesting. Rhea moved among them, collecting empty cloth scraps for filters. She worked as part of the team now. Colonists no longer stared with fear, but with quiet respect. Some patted her shoulder and said, "Good job, Rhea." Luke watched, pride in his heart. He knew the next challenge could be harder. Colony Council might question a sudden refugee. Patrol inspections would continue. They might want follow-up interviews. But for now, Rhea had a place. She had choices. She was part of the colony. That night, in the hidden room, Luke closed the vent grate and switched off his datapad. Rhea lay on the bunk, reading the small notebook of words he taught her. She read, "Home, safe, and team." She traced the letters with her finger. Her world had changed. Luke sat beside her. He said, "Tomorrow, we plan to find your ship." Rhea looked up. Her eyes glowed with determination. She whispered, "Yes." He took her hand. He whispered back, "Together." Outside, the colony. Lights blinked like distant stars. Inside, a human and an alien girl dreamed of home. Part 5. A week after the inspection, dark storm clouds gathered over Arden Farm. Gale winds howled as engineers secured loose panels. The patrol ship Arcturus stayed docked, its engines humming in the rain. Rhea looked out from the hydroponic wing, her silver hair damp against her face. She saw water pooling around power conduits. She frowned and tapped Luke on the shoulder. Luke followed her gaze. "Storm coming," he said softly. He pointed to the conduit and sketched sparks on his datapad. Rhea nodded and led him to the power control room. The door hissed open. A technician in yellow overalls checked gauges. He glanced at the readings. "And cursed voltage spiking," he said. "System could overload." Luke knelt by the panel and studied the wires. He pressed his finger to a loose cable. Sparks freed and landed on the floor. He jumped back. "We need to reduce load," he said. Rhea watched his face. She pressed her hand to her chest and pointed to the power lines. Then she tapped her temple to show an idea. Luke looked at her. He said, "You think redirect?" Rhea sketched a simple circuit on a scrap of paper. She drew the filter design she used before and added extra coils and safety valves. She pointed to the drawing and said, "Use filter parts to stabilize." Luke studied the diagram. It was clear. "We can divert excess energy through a buffer," he said. He tapped Rhea's sketch and smiled. They collected materials, spare pipes, old filter canisters, cloth scraps, and copper wiring from the storage room. Mara joined them with Rin. Together they assembled a makeshift energy buffer. The device looked rough. A cylinder wrapped in cloth with wires curling out like tentacles. Rhea tested each connection. She tightened bolts with careful focus. Thunder boomed and lights flickered. Alarms sounded. The technician backed away, shouted times. Short. Luke held the buffer steady as Rhea and Rin connected it to the main conduit. Mara watched the readings on a handheld scanner. The numbers climbed dangerously close to the limit. She held out her hand. "Ready?" Rhea touched a final wire. She looked at Luke. Her violet eyes glowed with calm determination. She nodded. Luke flipped a switch. The buffer hummed to life. A bright spark shot through the cylinder. The humming grew louder. Power lines pulsed, then steadied. Alarm lights faded. Mara checked her scanner. Load stabilizing, she said, relief in her voice. The buffer absorbed the excess energy and redirected it safely through the filter canister. Water from the nearby vent sprayed to cool the device. The storm raged outside, but inside the control room, the crisis passed. The technician slapped Ria's shoulder. "I've never seen that design," he said. "You're a genius." Ria blushed and looked down. She murmured, "Help." Luke nodded and said, "You saved the system." The four shared a quiet cheer. That afternoon, the patrol inspectors returned to test Arcturus's life support. They needed power from the colony grid. Rena met them in the docking bay and led them to the life support interface. Luke and Ria followed with the technician and Mara. The officers connected cables. The whole ship glowed as it powered up. A lead officer watched a gauge. It jumped, then held steady. He frowned. "I saw a spike," he said. "What happened?" Luke stepped forward. He tapped a datapad and said, "Storm surge. We installed an emergency buffer." He showed the sketch Ria made. The officer studied it, then checked the buffer device at the conduit entrance. He ran a handheld scanner. "Efficient," he said. "I recommend you document this for other colonies." Ria felt a rush of pride. She held her chest and repeated softly, "Efficient." The officer nodded. "Your design could save many farms." He smiled faintly. The patrol bowed and turned to leave. As they marched back to Arcturus, one inspector tapped the device and whispered to another, "Not every engineer thinks like that." Back in the hydroponic wing, colonists gathered to inspect the new buffer. They questioned Ria and Luke about the design. Workers sketched diagrams on clipboards. Some patted Ria on the back and said, "We need more like you." Ria blushed and whispered, "Thank you." She felt acceptance bloom. That evening, Jaya the medic brought Ria to the medical bay. She checked Ria's arm, where she held a small burn from tightening a wire. The wound was red but shallow. Jaya applied a cooling salve and bandaged it. "Aish," said, "You worked too hard. Rest now." Ria nodded and smiled. She felt safe. Luke waited outside. He watched Ria leave the door. He approached Jia. "She's ready," he said. Jia nodded. "She's stronger than most." She glanced at him. "You did right by her." Luke smiled softly and tucked his hands into his pockets. Ria returned to the hidden room. She sat on the bunk and held her notebook. Luke joined her. He tapped the datapad and sketched a map. He traced a path from the colony north to the crash site. Ria watched each line. Then she tapped the map and drew a small ship. Her breathing quickened. She said, "Ship?" Luke nodded. "We leave soon." He tapped the map and circled a date. 2 days. Ria pressed her hand to his and whispered, "Thank you." Luke squeezed her hand. "We go together." At night, the colony lights dimmed as power rationing began. Storm clouds loomed on the horizon. Ria lay awake and thought of her home. She felt fear, but also excitement. Luke's promise shone like a beacon. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Home. Soon." Outside, the wind rattled vents. Inside, hope pulsed through pipes and wires. An alien girl and a human technician prepared to journey beyond Arden Farm. Together, they would face the frozen tundra and find Ria's lost ship. And whatever dangers lay ahead, they would not face them alone. Part 6. Luke and Ria set out before dawn. The wind was cold and sharp against their faces. They carried packs with food, water, tools, and spare filter parts. Mara and Rin joined them, guiding a small rover through the hydroponic fields. The machine rolled quietly, tires crunching on wet soil. Ria sat beside Luke, wrapped in a blanket. She watched the domes fade behind them and felt a mix of fear and hope. She whispered, "Adventure." Luke smiled and patted her hand. The tide of night broke as they left the colony limits and entered tundra plains. Now tall icicles hung from broken power pylons. The rover's headlights cut through swirling snow. Luke checked the map and compass. Ria held a small sensor device that beeped softly. Every beep guided them closer to the crash site. The air grew thinner, and each breath felt heavy. Mara drove steadily, while Rin kept watch for hidden ice patches. They moved as one team after. An hour, the landscape opened into a frozen valley. Shards of metal glinted beneath snowdrifts. The ruins of a ship lay half buried in ice. Its hull was cracked, and vents were blocked by frost. Rhea gasped and pressed her hand to the rover's window. Luke guided the vehicle closer. He shut off the engine and switched on a heat lamp to melt surface ice. Rin and Mara unloaded tools. They worked quietly, respecting the silent wreck before them. Luke led Rhea to the vent where she had first survived. He brushed snow off the metal and showed her the scarred plate. "This was your home," he said softly. Rhea knelt and ran her fingers over the cold metal. She closed her eyes and remembered the crash. She felt a tear freeze on her cheek. Luke handed her a cloth and waited patiently. Then he opened the hatch quietly. Inside, the rover lamp shed light on a dark corridor lined with frost. Mara cleared the entrance and guided Rhea inside. The corridors were narrow and cluttered with broken equipment. Luke and Rin followed closely, their boots crunching on icy glass. Rhea held a small lamp and led them down the hall. She pointed to a room with circuit boards. Sparks of life flickered when she placed her hand on a control panel. The ship trembled with a weak hum. Hope stirred in their hearts. Inside the control room, they found data logs. Rhea pressed her hand to a keypad. She tapped a few keys she remembered from dream images. The screen lit up with data. Rin read aloud the last entries, coordinates of her world, messages pleading for rescue. Tears filled Rhea's eyes. She read the words in her mind. Luke stood behind her and offered a gentle embrace. She leaned into him, feeling safe. The logs confirmed her home world and hinted at a beacon signal. Luke studied the control panel. Magnets and wires were loose. He sketched a simple repair plan on the datapad. He tapped Rhea's sketch from earlier and added extra power filters to protect the circuits. Rin and Mara gathered spare wiring and filter canisters from their packs. They worked swiftly to reconnect conduits and solder broken lines. Rhea fetched parts and handed them with precision. Each spark of repair brought the ship closer to life. As they finished, the control panel glowed steadily. A low hum grew into a steady pulse. Frost melted around vents as warm air flowed. On the main screen, a beacon icon blinked. Rhea pressed it and watched a small dot shine on the sky map. The ship was alive again. She cheered softly, and Luke smiled widely. Mara clapped Rhea on the back. Rin wiped sweat from her brow. They felt victory in the frozen silence. Suddenly, the wind howled through a broken hull plate. Snow gusted into the corridor. The beacon beeped urgently. Outside, the rover headlights showed a pack of frost hounds, wild creatures drawn by the warm glow. Their eyes glowed amber. The rover was too far to reach quickly. A clear path lay between the hounds and the ship's airlock. The team froze. Rhea gripped Luke's arm. She whispered, "I scare." Luke nodded. He picked up a tool and held it like a staff. Mara held a flare, ran a welding torch. They formed a circle around Rhea. Luke stepped forward and spoke in a calm, firm voice. He tapped the flare against a wall to light it. The sudden spark flared bright, and the hounds halted. They backed away and howled. Rin raised the torch. The firelight drove the pack into the storm. Within moments, the tundra was empty again. The team exhaled relief. Mara checked Rhea's pulse. Luke patted her shoulder. Rhea placed a hand on the beacon switch and whispered, "Go home." Ship answered with a soft chime. Coordinates zipped. Across the display, outside, the hounds' howls faded into distance. They climbed into the rover and strapped in. Mara started the engine. The rover rumbled as it rolled across the frozen valley. Rhea watched the ship fade behind them, warmed by new life and shining beacon. Luke held her hand. She squeezed it. She no longer felt lost. The return journey was quiet, except for the hum of the rover. The storm had eased. Dawn light peeked through clouds. The domes of Arden Farm glowed faintly on the horizon. As they neared the colony limits, Foreman Rinna and Mara readied a welcome party. Lights from hydroponic bays blinked in greeting. When they entered the colony gates, workers cheered. The rover stopped, and Luke helped Rhea down. She held her head high and smiled at the crowd. Rena announced, Ria Tal has found her home ship and saved our power systems. Colonists clapped and honored her. Luke stepped forward and received a nod of respect. Ria hugged him, then turned to face her new family. She whispered, Thank you all. That evening, the colony held a small feast under the dome's soft lights. Food from the saved harvest-covered tables. Ria sat beside Luke, Mara, Rin, and Jaya. She shared stories of the crashed ship. Colonists listened in wonder. Laughter and hope filled the air. Ria looked at Luke and thought of the journey they shared. She felt love and gratitude. In her heart, two worlds had merged, one of ice and loss, and one of warmth and community. And she knew her life would never be the same.